Hi, I'm Colin. I'm one of the CS61A summer GSIs, and today we're going to go through how to model the Fibonacci sequence in Python. So just a little bit of recap. The Fibonacci sequence, let me just switch to brush here shortly. And so there's that. Okay, so the Fibonacci sequence, okay, here we go. So the Fibonacci sequence is a famous sequence that has two numbers at the beginning. So the beginning numbers are 0 and 1. And then from there on out, we're able to create the rest of the sequence. And let me just go ahead and do a few more numbers so it becomes clear. Okay, so here are our starting numbers right here. So we have 0 and 1 at the start. And we can use those numbers to figure out what the next number is going to be. So for example, let's say this is the 0th index, this is the first index, this is the second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth respectively. So to figure out what the element in the second index is going to be, we can use the previous two numbers. So in this case, we're using 0 and 1. And so if we add those together, well, we get 1. And so that same premise holds true throughout the rest of the sequence. So say, for example, we want to figure out what the element in the fifth index is. Well, we just simply look at what the numbers were right before, so in the third and fourth positions. And we discovered that now they're 2 and 3, and so adding 2 and 3 together gives us 5. So what's really important to note here is that if we're going to model this in code, we need to somehow figure out a way to keep track of those two numbers in order to generate the number in the next index or the next position. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So we're working here with let's create a function. So we'll use def, and then we'll just name this function, let's just name it fib, short for Fibonacci, and it's going to take in a number n. Well, what n is going to tell us is that's going to tell us what Fibonacci number we want. So however far down the sequence we want. So if we wanted, the 10th Fibonacci number, we would pass 10 in for n, and that would return whatever the 10th Fibonacci number is. All right, so just to give you an example, say, for example, we called fib of 3. And that would return, well, we look fib of 3 is 2, so that should return 2. All right. So the first thing we want to do is we need to figure out, well, what are our first numbers going to be? So we remember that the element in the 0th position is 0, and the element in the first position is 1. So that's kind of the premise of the Fibonacci sequence. And then in order to generate the next numbers, we need to use the previous two numbers to do that. And so since this seems like an iterative process by nature, we're probably starting to think we need to use some sort of loop in order to continuously go through and update these numbers. So let's go ahead and start out by setting our current number to 0, and then our next number is equal to 1. And why does this make sense? Well, this makes sense because we're starting at 0, so we're starting at the beginning of the sequence. So our current number is 0, so we're looking right here. And then we see that our next number is 1. So there's our 1 right there. Okay. And then we need to be able to generate the numbers further down the sequence. So let's say they pass in, for example, 3. Well, we need to figure out what at Fibonacci, the number in position 3 is equal to 2. So in order to do this, we can continuously decrement n. So they're passing in n. We can use that to let us know when we've actually hit the number that we're looking for. So say, for example, if we're looking for 3, each time we go through our loop, we can decrement that by 1, and then we know when Fibonacci number, or when n is greater, when is equal to 0, n is equal to 0 rather, we are at that position in the Fibonacci sequence. So let's go ahead and do that. So knowing how we're going to use n, we can create the condition of our while loop. And so we're going to say, well, n is greater than 0. And so again, how a while loop works is every time it goes to the top of the while statement, it evaluates this condition right here. And if this condition returns true, then it's going to evaluate the body of the while loop. Otherwise, it's going to exit the loop and continue evaluating the rest of the code. All right, so what do we want to do inside of our while loop? Well, if we remember that we can use our current and next numbers in order to generate the number that's further down the sequence, we're going to model this through code. So the first thing we want to do is we want to update our current and next numbers each time that we iterate. And so thinking of it this way, well, if we're looking at position 2 right here, how are we generating position 2? Well, we're looking at what these previous two numbers are and adding them together. So in order to do that, our next should be our current plus our next. So we're going to do cur plus next. Okay, so that's what our next number should be. And then before right here, so this value right here corresponds to what we're updating our current to. Well, what is our current going to be? Well, our current is going to be our old next. So we're going to update our current to be our old next. And this strange syntax right here where we have this comma and two different values allows you to not use temporary variables if you want to assign two different variables on the same line and using their old values. So this saves us from having to do, temp and then set current equal to temp or something like that. All right, and so we need to do one more thing in the body of this loop, and that is decrement our n, because we're using our n to keep track of, well, how far down the sequence are we? So each time we iterate, we're going to subtract n by 1. And so there's this handy syntax, n minus equals 1, which is the exact same, so I'll just go ahead and put in parentheses, that is the exact same as doing n equals n minus 1. But this is just a little bit more natural and short. And just a correction here, that is not n minus n, it is n minus 1. So there's that. Okay, and then so assuming we've exited this while loop and we've gone until n is equal to 0, what this function should be returning is the current Fibonacci number at that position in the Fibonacci sequence. So we've already done all of the work. At this point, we simply just need to return our current number. And so here, outside the while loop, and it's really important that we get our indentation right here, we're going to return cur. And so if we happen to put this inside the while loop, so if it was indented inside the while loop, this line right here, return exits out of a function. So it would only, the while loop would break immediately. So it's very important that we return outside of the while loop. And so that makes sense, right? So our current number after going through this while loop should be the number that we want. So if we pass in 3, we're setting our current. So if we pass in 3 to fib right here, looking at this here, we're setting our n equal to 3 in this case. Our current's equal to 0, our next is equal to 1, and then we're updating our current to be equal to the next. So in this case, our current is now going to be 1, and then our next is now going to be current plus next. So we're at position 2, next is now equal to 1, and current is now equal to 1 as well. So then if we model this here, we're at this point, and we only need to iterate one more time. And you can see how this process keeps going, and we eventually get to the place in the Fibonacci sequence where we want, and then we just return that current value. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask your TA or post on Piazza, and we're happy to help. Thanks for watching the videos.